that note, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Natalia Canham, Executive Director of UNFPA. Dr. Canham, Nairobi was a great success and energizes all to act and do better. What exactly did the Nairobi Summit mean for UNFPA? What is UNFPA doing to assist member states in achieving the Nairobi commitments? Thank you for being here, Dr. Canham.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, civil society leaders, young people, colleagues and friends. Since 1947, we now have the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, and it is 28 years after the landmark Cairo ICPD with its far-reaching action agenda. And that was followed just a year later by the assertion that women's rights are human rights in the Beijing platform. And now we're continuing the journey towards 2030 with the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda carrying our fervent hopes for peace, still holding on to our aspiration to make this a just and equal world for women and girls and everyone. And we have to admit that it's an era besieged by enormous upheaval, from conflicts to climate crisis to COVID-19 and rampant inequalities. When it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights, we're still falling short. We're falling woefully short and we're failing women and girls. 33,000 underage girls were married off against their will each and every day. Then we have more than 4 million girls at risk of female genital mutilation this year alone, and some 736 million women subjected to sexual and gender-based violence, nearly 1 woman in 3, frequently by an intimate partner. Every 11 minutes, someone will die. Grim statistics that demand a solution. And the question is, how do we take action to radically change the picture and rapidly? No time to lose. And this is what accountability to women and girls will look like. From Africa, there's this proverb, if you wish to move mountains tomorrow, start by lifting stones today. And last year's report by the High-Level Commission on the Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25 follow-up offers us a number of important recommendations. The Nairobi Commission report is action-oriented, and it calls for sexual and reproductive justice as the path forward. It says prioritize groups facing the worst disparities in sexual and reproductive health and gender equality. And in order to do that, we have to open our eyes to see them. In far too many places, Indigenous people, women and girls of African descent, older women, persons with disabilities, rendered invisible because the data excludes them. Quality disaggregated data. That's essential to make people who are victimized or vulnerable visible. Accountability means legal and health system frameworks that uphold women's freedom, their right and entitlement to make their sexual and reproductive health decisions freely. Full access to health services with no restrictions, without requiring approval by a man, by a spouse, by a guardian. And to shift these harmful, deeply rooted gender norms is mission critical. Reaching young people, girls and boys with comprehensive sexuality education that helps promote values of mutual respect, of empathy, of consensual behavior. And I'm calling on men and boys to be serious allies, to speak up and stand up and be counted in this mission to root out all barriers to progress on gender equality. That betters men's lives too. Women's leadership matters. At UNFPA, we prioritize investment in women-led local organizations, feminist partners like the Women's Rehabilitation Center in Nepal. And they're supporting women who are hard hit, both by the COVID pandemic and by the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence. 40% of UNFPA's humanitarian funds go to the hands of women-led groups. And that's what we all have to do more of. Trust women to deploy local solutions to meet their own needs And that's how we reach those furthest behind. Finally, increasing domestic spending and international financing at levels high enough to achieve sexual and reproductive justice for all. And speaking for UNFPA, we are accountable as an organization in 120 plus countries and territories. Our people are on the ground, they're busy assisting governments and civil society and businesses and young people. And what's been great is that in the 2 years since Nairobi ICPD 25, we're getting some traction in integrating the thousands of country-led Nairobi commitments into universal periodic reviews at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Women continue to advocate for their inclusion in voluntary national reviews and other accountability processes, because bodily autonomy, it's mission critical. It's the foundation for gender equality. And it's the foundation for realizing women's hard-won ICPD and Beijing agendas. So to close, let me say that our eyes and actions in UNFPA are fixed on a single number, 0. We're energetic in co-leading the Generation Equality Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. And we're going to continue to focus on 0 barriers to contraception and reproductive health care, 0 preventable deaths in pregnancy and childbirth, 0 gender-based violence. That must mean 0 femicide. It must mean 0 girls dragged into child marriages, 0 cases of female genital mutilation, and 0 online violence and intimidation, as we're demanding in our UNFPA #BodyRight campaign. Ambitious, yes. Achievable, absolutely yes. Together, I know we can, and I know we will achieve this agenda. When sleeping women awake, mountains move. The responsibility and accountability belong to all of us. And let's act on that, taking a path towards justice and peace, very essential in this moment. So we realize sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, for good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanem, for sharing with us that it's urgent to take actions to ensure the human rights of women and girls, and also for sharing the commitments of the UNFPA towards achieving gender equality, women and girls' sexual and reproductive health and rights, and ensuring that no one is left behind. As a Latin American woman, I am very proud to see you leading the UNFPA.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a usted. And now, it is with great pleasure that I want to introduce Mrs. Asa Regner, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Mrs. Regner was not able to join us in person, but she would like to share a video message with us. We ask Mrs. Regner the following. The GEF in Mexico City and Paris represented another groundbreaking worldwide moment and reminder about advancing women and girls agenda. And through partnerships with civil society organizations, government, foundations, and the private sector. Beijing has a comprehensive and vast agenda with many interlinkage with other areas and agendas, as does the ICPD. What can be done to ensure that these interlinkages are not neglected? How can the Action Coalition help in this regard?
Excellencies, representatives of civil society, powerful youth activists. For the first time in history, UN Women, UNFPA, and their partners have ensured that accountability and transparency is placed at the forefront of the Beijing and ICPD agendas. The most critical form of accountability is that which is driven by women, girls, and gender-diverse populations. No one has the right to demand their rights, decide and lead, other than women and girls themselves. The Generation Equality Forum has built on the commitments made at ICPD 25 through the power of 6 multi-stakeholder action coalitions centered on issues critical for concrete gender equality results. In less than 8 months since the Generation Equality Forum, leaders and commitment makers are rapidly and boldly organizing within and across action coalitions. The action coalitions are powerful structures governing accountability of the 1,000 plus commitment makers and charting the path of what needs to happen now. Leveraging the power of digital technology, at this CSW 66, a commitments dashboard has been launched, enabling all generation equality commitments to be accessible to every vested stakeholder across the world. We know that SRHR matters in all contexts, but crises have proven, time and again, to constrain these rights for those most vulnerable women and girls the world over. That is why we are inspired by the 150 signatories who have stepped forward to support the Women, Peace, Security and Humanitarian Action Compact as part of the key outcomes from generation equality. Looking to the 77th session of United Nations General Assembly later this year, the accountability framework will be launched. The essential mechanisms of generation equality are thus in place. We are strongly committed to continue working closely with our partners and through action coalitions, together with commitment makers of the Nairobi Summit and the Generation Equality Forum. UN Women and its partners recognize that women, girls, and gender diverse populations are not beneficiaries but valuable partners. Moving forward, this is the case for investment, better accountability, and traction towards Agenda 2030 and towards the realization of sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Regner, for recognizing that UN Women and its partners recognize women, girls, and gender diverse populations as valuable partners, not beneficiaries. This is the time to move forward, to invest, to increase accountability, and to gain even more traction for the Nairobi and Beijing agendas. We must strive for sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. Moving now to another set of our more specific commitments on family planning, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Samukeliso Dube, Executive Director of FP 2030. Welcome, Dr. Dube. The International Conference on Family Planning 2022 will be held in November this year. What are your expectations? How can we ensure that the conference promotes a broader and rights-based understanding of a comprehensive SRHR and profiles other areas of SRHR beyond family planning?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And Your Excellencies, country representatives working tirelessly across the globe to ensure commitments to SRHR are met for the advancement of women. Just greetings to the civil society representative here and the private sector organizations that espouse the principles of shared value in this agenda. We have been anticipating and we've been awaiting this conference to take place, so we can't wait for November, isn't it? Now, beginning with the theme of this year's long-awaited conference, which is actually family planning plus universal health coverage, we see the importance of nesting family planning into a broader health context. As this group knows, and we're preaching to the converted here, family planning is basic healthcare and the need is universal. Since the global development community made the connection, women's empowerment is equal to economic empowerment, we now know too well there cannot be women empowerment without investing in family planning. Family planning is essential to women's economic empowerment, and economic empowerment can never advance when we leave half of our populations behind. And for us to move with them in tandem, we need to invest in family planning. Rights-based family planning, which is the R that is in SRHR, the other R, it has been at the core of FP 2030's mission since our creation, our inception, nearly a decade ago. You recall one of the ways we have operationalized this guiding principle has been through our accountability mechanisms. The framework that we have, and we are launching a new one this year that are applied to FP 2030's commitments. They resonate with what we ought to do across many areas that affect SRHR, including in emergency responses, including how we program for youth and towards gender equality. In this accountability framework, we engage civil society, we engage youth in a partnership approach to ensure that their voices are heard and their voices are amplified in engaging governments to support both rights-based programming and to even provide funding to implement these programs. More about accountability, we know that accountability ought to be to resonate beyond healthcare. It has to resonate to social cohesion, and therefore we believe that this conference should provide us platforms to engage with non-traditional partners and move slowly towards social accountability, because this transcends not just the work of FP 2030, but some of the partners that are not in this room today. The broader mandate needs more hands on deck. It is about expanding the narrative. At ICFP, I am looking forward to seeing FP 2030 commitments announced at every level, announced from private sector, we do hope, from international NGOs and local NGOs, from donor countries, including the countries who receive the services that we have termed in the past decade the global goods. So we believe that we can expand this narrative and have more countries and more constituencies making commitments that would encompass the family planning within a broader SRHR agenda. I am looking forward to important conversations about how we collaborate across sectors to ensure that commitments are country-led and are adequately financed, because our commitments mean little if we do not have the resources to implement them. Aware of the challenge in financing, we know that we can't rebuild better if especially the economic recovery conversations that we have right now. So we ought to nest family planning in the broader SRHR agenda and ensure that holistically there is financing. We know that commitments, when buttressed by regular accountability mechanisms, they do accelerate family planning progress. The commitments made under FP 2020 partnership, they contributed to family planning use approximately 30% above historic trends in FP 2020 countries previously. We want to make even more progress in this decade of family planning, and those conversations need to be amplified at the conference later this year in November. We also know that for national commitments to succeed, they need to be more than just a speech at an international conference, including in platforms such as this one. That's why we ask that all the commitments that are made to ensure that family planning is embedded into economic planning programs, it's embedded into financial budgeting mechanisms of countries. These commitments ought to be developed and launched in concert with civil society and youth organizations to enhance that accountability at home. Because the commitment a country makes isn't to FP 2030 or to international donors or to UNFPA, it is to the broader world so that there is cadence on what that accountability is. It is also to the women and girls in all of our countries who have the right to family planning and broader SRHR that they need when and where they need it. They need to access it in a rights-based approach. I'm looking forward to the conference, and I do hope that we will all meet there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dube. That is very promising, and we're looking forward to the meeting in Thailand this year and learning more about the SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound commitments that will be adopted there. Thank you very much for joining us today. And now I would like to introduce a video message by His Excellency, Mr. Flemming Muller Mortensen, Danish Minister for Development Cooperation, who would like to share a message with us about accountability.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, greetings from Copenhagen. Denmark was proud to co-host the Nairobi Summit, and we are proud to co-lead the SRHR Action Coalition of the Generation Equality. The ICPD and Beijing processes have been instrumental in placing the human rights of women and girls high on the global agenda. They brought together governments, the UN, civil society and the private sector in joint efforts to improve the lives of women and girls. Bold commitments were made. All eyes should now be on how to ensure accountability. The first report of the ICPD High-Level Commission pointed to the need to speed up our work. The global challenges for women and girls are still too many. The pandemic has led to increased gender-based violence and setbacks on the SRHR. Gender inequality is growing. It is simply wrong. The climate crisis is affecting women and girls the most, caused increased risks and burden. We must address these challenges in our collective efforts. We have much work ahead of us. We are all accountable for the promises made. That includes governments. Women and girls are agents of changes. We can only succeed with their full and meaningful participation in all steps of the process. We want to reach gender equality in all corners of the globe, leaving no one behind. Denmark is committed to do our part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flemming Møller Mortensen, for your clear message about speeding up this work, especially given how the global challenges that women and girls face are still growing. All governments need to ensure women and girls' participation and gender equality. I would like to move now to the second part of our program to learn more about experiences and realities of the accountability work that has been done on the ground in different parts of the world. Con mucho gusto quiero presentar a la señora Esperanza Delgado. Nuestra primera pregunta es para usted. La conocemos como gerente de Relaciones Interinstitucionales de MEXFAM, organización miembro de IPPF. Usted ha utilizado los resultados de la 57ª sesión de la Comisión de la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer, así como los tratados de derechos humanos para abogar por la ampliación de la ley del aborto en México, permitiendo la eliminación de ciertas barreras para que las niñas y mujeres sobrevivientes de violencia sexual puedan acceder a un aborto seguro en todos los estados del país. ¿Podría explicar cuáles han sido los pasos seguidos? Bienvenida.
Muchas gracias, Marianela. Good morning, everyone. My intervention today intends to demonstrate that the sessions of the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, remain relevant not only as a key political spaces where member states may renew their commitments to gender equality and women and girls' rights, but also as an intergovernmental body for the monitoring and implementation of the Beijing Platform of Action. In 2013, CSW adopted a historical global consensus on the elimination and prevention of all forms of violence against women and girls, in which UN member states agreed to promote and protect the human rights of all women. Women and girls who are victims of violence should have access to sexual and reproductive health services and safe abortion. The adoption of these agreed conclusions, in addition to recommendations made by human rights treaty bodies in Mexico, was used by MEXFAM and partners to successfully advance the agenda of sexual and reproductive rights, as well as bodily autonomy. As a result, abortion resulting from rape was approved at national level. MEXFAM, together with the civil society allies, carry out the following actions with a long-term strategy. First, advocacy with the Ministry of Health to acknowledge norms indicating that safe abortion should be an essential health service. Also, to guarantee an enabled environment and medical supplies, and to ensure that conscientious objection was not an excuse to prevent women and girls access to a safe abortion. Among other things, the Ministry of Health also approved a budget earmarked to safe abortion. Second, with the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality, we joined a constructive dialogue oriented to communicate winning messages to girls and adolescents about the right to terminate a pregnancy due to rape, to live a life free of violence, and to decide about their bodies. As an example, a mass media campaign was launched to create awareness and prevent early pregnancies caused by sexual violence among girls and adolescents. At that time, we embarked on a strategy aimed at strengthening the position of the Mexican government in the global arena in favor of sexual and reproductive rights, and in particular, the right to reproductive autonomy. In this regard, the work was done with the Ministries of Interior, Population, and Foreign Affairs. Some of the outcomes indicate the following. MEXFAM accepted the recommendations from the Human Rights Council to urge a revision of regulatory frameworks to decriminalize abortion and allow women, adolescents, and girls to access legal and safe abortion services throughout the country. At the Nairobi Summit, commemorative to Cairo +25, Mexico committed to guarantee access to comprehensive, safe abortion care. The Gender Equality Forum celebrating Beijing +25 set the most aspirational agenda to achieve gender equality and the full recognition of all sexual and reproductive rights, including bodily autonomy. The forum was co-hosted by Mexico and France, and the Bodily Autonomy Action Coalition committed to expand access to safe abortion for all people who may become pregnant, and that legal and policy barriers, including self-managed abortion, are removed. And most recently, the Mexican Supreme Court of Justice ruled as unconstitutional to criminalize women and persons capable of pregnancy who decide to terminate a pregnancy at its early stage. Today, out of 32 states in Mexico have decriminalized abortion up to the 12th week. The importance of global commitment to national policy making is not always evident, nor the interlinkages among different CSW and other UN conferences. My message today presents an example of how we used the outcome of the 57th CSW session as a fundamental pillar to overcome obstacles and take advantage of resolutions from other human rights treaty bodies to advance women and girls' rights to bodily autonomy. When member states accept recommendations and express their positions, the path is open to continue local and national efforts so that those commitments are translated into actions. Words have consequences. Let's walk the talk in favor of guaranteeing sexual and reproductive rights for girls, adolescents, women, and persons capable of gestating. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por compartir todas las acciones realizadas en México. Eso nos llena de esperanza, especialmente en los países donde todavía existen barreras para el acceso al aborto y barreras para los servicios de salud reproductiva para nuestras mujeres y niñas. Muchísimas gracias. La siguiente pregunta es para la señora Carme Gualvía, directora de la Agencia Catalana de Cooperación al Desarrollo. Sabemos que el cambio climático tiene un impacto significativo en las mujeres y las niñas. ¿Qué significan para usted las agendas de Beijing y la CIPD? ¿Puede darnos ejemplos de cómo utiliza estas agendas orientadas a la acción en su defensa de la acción climática con perspectiva de género y los vínculos con la salud y los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, asegurándose de que los gobiernos se hagan responsables de sus promesas? Muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias, Marianela. I will follow in English as I prepare my presentation in English, so I will follow in English. I am honored to be part of this panel, thanks to the governments of Argentina, Denmark, France, Mexico, and the International Planned Parenthood Federation and the United Nations Populations Fund for inviting me to this impactful event. The issue is very relevant and the action is urgent. Let me start by saying a few words about my organization, the Catalan Agency for Development Cooperation. It's the Catalan government body in charge of managing the development cooperation and humanitarian action policies, and is assigned to the Catalan Ministry for Foreign Action and Open Government of the Generalitat de Catalunya. Our entire cooperation policy is centered in gender and human rights approach. For the last, it's been like this for the last 8 years and has two main objectives: the transformation of unequal relations of gender and power in all areas, confronting the structural, social, economic, political, and cultural causes that perpetuate them, and the materialization of the human rights of all people, with a strong stress on women and girls' rights. Following this objective of the gender and human rights approach, women's rights and sexual and reproductive rights are a priority for the agency and are deeply linked to climate justice in our opinion. Therefore, I would say that the Beijing and ICPD agendas are the core of our work. Let me now give you some examples on how do we land this approach. We use different tools to implement actions with a gender and human rights-based approach. Calls for projects for NGOs, bilateral and multilateral agreements involving different stakeholders, and also facilitating opportunities to create new and sometimes unexpected partnerships. I will start with the project financed by the agency from l'Associació de Drets Sexuals i Reproductius, that, by the way, has given me the opportunity to be here today. Because it's a project, a very, very powerful one, I think, that tries to amplify the interconnection between climate justice and sexual and reproductive justice in Catalonia, but also in Mozambique and Senegal, where we make this connection like the Agenda 2030 is giving us. This we have to work together, in every country. And Mozambique and Senegal are two of our priority countries. The climate crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and socio-ecological injustices have emerged from interconnected system of oppression. To face this deepening crisis and accelerate the path to a just transformation that leaves no one behind, the project proposes to work from a holistic perspective and with the coherence of policies that address the structural barriers of the system and allow us to promote the protection and defense of human rights and the planet. In this struggle, women in all their diversity, the intersectional, anti-racist, decolonial, and the LGBTQ+ population and diverse feminism must be at the forefront of policy formulation and action, as they are simultaneously the most affected by climate change. In fact, they are putting the most transformative, inspiring, holistic, and inclusive solutions on the table. Climate activists have incorporated the gender justice axis into their approach. There cannot be climate justice without gender justice. Most strategies to curb the effects of climate change do not work for the defense of sexual and reproductive rights. The interconnection between climate justice and sexual and reproductive justice has not reached the majority of Catalan citizens, and SRHR continue to be excluded from strategies to stop climate change. So Catalan feminist organizations and groups in the third sector and holders of obligation must integrate this connection and contribute to putting the defense of sexual rights at the heart of the climate change political agendas. There are other examples of the connection that we are implementing, like the City project is funded by European Union. And there we talk about environmental resilience in Inhambane, Mozambique, creating participatory tools for women and vulnerable population for planning their territory with the communities and creating resilient responses to climate change, all with the lenses of a gender and human rights approach. We have also started to partner for women's funds in Colombia, Senegal, Mozambique, and Morocco to finance grassroots organizations. They are already working in this connection bottom up. We also contribute to the work to Urgent Action Fund in Africa. Another powerful tool for us is the reception of rights defenders in Catalonia for 6 months in a holistic approach program. Most of them are defending territories and land rights against aggressions of extractivist companies and governments, but also face sexual threats, like Karen Chilaga or Lilia Prado from Mexico or Diana Martinez from Colombia, just to give you some recent examples. It is also relevant our participation in the action coalitions of the Generation Equality from United Nations, UN Women. This collective effort is helping us to focus on the SRHR and deepen our intersectional approach in Catalonia and abroad. We also believe in the networks already developing their work in specific areas like Habitat International Coalition, for example. We are working with them in 3 regions, Africa, Latin America, and Middle East. And we are focusing on facilitating dialogue and co-learning spaces where, again, gender approach is in the middle of the conversation. And finally, our collaboration with the International Peasants Movement, La Via Campesina, and with their members' struggles in their territories for a dignified life, for a better world, and more supportive, more social, climate and environmental justice, and especially for food sovereignty. From the agency, we are committed to deepen the intersectional gaze, improve collective workspaces for the co-production of public policies, and increase the direct funding of grassroots feminist organizations of the Global South, creating a stronger multi-level and multi-stakeholders connection to foster the right policies for gender and climate justice. As Dr. Natalia Canem just told us at the beginning of the session, trust women. Thanks for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias por compartir el trabajo de la Agencia Catalana de Cooperación al Desarrollo. Quiero felicitarles por utilizar enfoques antiopresivos y enfoques interseccionales en su trabajo y por mostrarnos también cómo se relacionan los derechos sexuales y reproductivos en su lucha ante el cambio climático. Gracias por compartir con nosotros. Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Richard Mugain, from Reproductive Health Uganda, IPPF's member association in Uganda. Welcome. I would like to ask you a question. The adoption of the declaration on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development at the CPD, as well as the momentum of the Nairobi Summit, were the foundation for your advocacy to push for national level commitments and actions on family planning, adolescent sexual and reproductive health, comprehensive sexuality education, and gender-based violence. Can you please share the results of this work and what has changed in Uganda with this work?
Yeah, thank you so much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from the Pearl of Africa, Uganda. Basically, we've said that to realize sexual and reproductive health rights and gender equality, accountability is a must. And I think Dr. Dube Rachel said it. If we want to ensure that we have accountability, financing is a key element. And I will start by appreciating the support we've received from International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, and the Danish Family Planning Association that have supported our engagement at the global UN processes, like the Commission on Population and Development, the Nairobi Summit, and others. To go back on the work on how we use accountability from the Nairobi back to Uganda, we started on the 52nd Commission on Population and Development in New York. We participate in these processes because we want to be part of the commitments our governments make. We want to engage our governments, and then we come back home and we hold them accountable, and we to implement the commitments, and we work with them to see that those commitments are implemented. So after that, the CPD, the 52nd CPD, we came back to Uganda. As CSOs, we convened a meeting that was through National Population Council, which is a government entity and responsible for CPD of different players. And we said, okay, Uganda made a report, at CPD, and we are going to Nairobi, where we must make commitments, high-level commitments in Nairobi, and that are binding to everyone. And we agreed that the best person to do that would be the president of Uganda, who went to Nairobi, and we started strategizing on how we could make the president to go to Nairobi and make the commitments for Uganda. So as CSOs, Reproductive Health Uganda, and other CSOs with support from different agencies, donors like UNFPA, we organize a CSO symposium to contribute to the ICPD 25 in Nairobi, because we wanted to contribute on the commitments for the country. That symposium, CSO symposium, contributed to the national symposium on ICPD 25. The symposium brought together different players, stakeholders, donors, CSOs, ministries, and young people, women, and others. As CSOs, we developed a position paper, and this position paper, of course, was trying to highlight key gaps when it comes to sexual reproductive health and gender equality and family planning, resource gaps, gaps in contraceptives, gaps in adolescent health and maternal health, gaps in gender equality. So that position paper came up with the recommendations and calling our government to make sure that those recommendations are included in the Nairobi Summit. And indeed, when the president had to make commitments for the country, that the president read in Nairobi. She was the chief delegate to the ICPD 25 in Nairobi. After Nairobi, we had to come back again through National Population Council. We agreed to form a task force that, the commitments have been made. We can't just let them be on paper. They have to be implemented. And we agreed a task force that included members of parliament, CSOs, aligned ministries, and others. So we agreed that one of the things, the areas that the low-hanging fruit that we had was the development of the National Development Plan 3. The National Development Plan is a document that guides the country on the key priorities for the next 5 years. It started in 2020 to 2025. So we had to make sure that the commitments that were made in Nairobi, that includes gender equality, working the gender equality talk, sexuality education, family planning, especially looking at contraceptives, issues of adolescent health, were included in the National Development Plan 3. And indeed, of course, we are part of the development process as CSOs, and most of the issues that we raised were included in the National Development Plan 3. And of course, we didn't stop at that, because the National Development Plan 3 is at country level. We had to make sure that at sub-national level, these things have to be implemented. So we had to engage and make sure that the sub-national level, they call them district development plan. Again, they are 5-year development plans, 2020, 2021 to 2025. We made sure that these commitments are included and prioritized and budgeted, and they are budgeted for. Of course, we achieved that and we celebrated, but of course, it doesn't stop there. We are continuing to engage, of course, with support from the agencies I mentioned and others. We continue to engage and to make sure that we realize from paper to execution, so that the woman, that girl, that adolescent benefits, they come to realize the commitments that Uganda has made. In conclusion, I can say that when these global processes are so necessary for civil society to be part of, and they are necessary, that it's a one step for accountability, and we appreciate people who recognize the importance of these global processes that we engage in, and then we come back home and we implement, and we make sure we hold our governments accountable to implement what they have committed on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. It is fascinating how CSO articulated their work to help your government accountable for these commitments. Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Hatim Asnag, founder and president of the Sustainable Development Youth in Morocco, and Young Commissioner for the High-Level Commission on the Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25. From a young person's perspective, how do you see the implementation of the Nairobi commitments? And what are the plans to ensure accountability on the global commitments made at the summit? In particular, the high-level task force on accountability. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, dear distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. Thank you for inviting me to share a contribution during this important event, highlighting women's position in implementing concrete change. In my capacity as the youngest member of the High-Level Commission on the Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25 follow-up, I salute and congratulate the efforts of each and everyone in being more inclusive and fair, to ensure that no one is left behind and that we reach the furthest behind first, based on timely and coordinated production and dissemination of disaggregated data to further support national governments in the elaboration of data-driven policies, strategies, and programs geared towards the fulfillment of the ICPD agenda and the Nairobi Summit commitments as a critical contribution to the 2030 agenda and its SDGs. This high-level commission was established to help track those commitments and advance the political advocacy to continue to leverage the momentum of the historic Nairobi Summit. The commission, which is co-chaired by His Excellency Dr. Jakaya Kikwete, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and Her Excellency Michel Jean, former Governor General of Canada and former Secretary General of l'Organisation de la Francophonie, has gathered leaders from all over the world to promote the further and accelerated implementation of ECPD and the incorporation of the outcomes of the Nairobi Summit as an integral component in the decade of action to deliver on the sustainable development goals. In this sense, since it englobes a fair vision from a diverse set of people with the presence of indigenous and minorities, its implementation is achievable and can have remarkable results only with mobilization and engagement of each one of us. These commitments illustrate the vision of each society category and serve as a roadmap to facilitate actions and initiatives for the women's and girls' empowerment. The recommendations put forth in the Commission's first report, no exception, no exclusion, realizing sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice for all, launched this past November on the occasion of the Nairobi Summit's second anniversary, are critical to this Commission on the status of women, to all the discussion on ending violence against women and girls, and to the future of development. In its report, the High-Level Commission recognizes regrettably that the ambition of the landmark of International Conference on Population and Development, ECPD, is yet to be realized of millions of women and girls, men and boys the world over. As Commissioner, we have taken note that the COVID-19 pandemic has a worrisome setback in the implementation of the ECPD 25 commitments and in advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights around the world. Moreover, the Commission's reports points to disturbing patterns of inequalities, of lack of accountability, exacerbated by the pandemic. This is further underscored by the many indicators that are off track in the details. Global commitments, mentoring framework that is included in the report and presents a picture of the status of progress against each of the 12 overarchers. Core commitments contained in the Nairobi Statement: injustice and discrimination based on gender, age, race, ethnicity, disability, refugee status, and sexual orientation and gender identity has been translated in holding back vast numbers of people from realizing their rights and choices. This is why the report of the High-Level Commission calls on an agenda on sexual and reproductive justice. We must go beyond merely promising sexual and reproductive health and rights to ensuring that everyone has the ability to exercise their rights by removing too many barriers that they face in the health systems, families, and societies. Achieving sexual and reproductive justice hangs on challenging and eliminating discriminatory social norms that constrain bodily autonomy, agency, and rights. At the same time, in our report, the Commission recalls the spirit of the Nairobi Summit, which demonstrates just how much support there is globally for sexual and reproductive justice. While overall progress has been hampered, we acknowledge that the core Nairobi commitment on which we are reporting are driving national agenda to achieve the ICPD. And despite all, there is some hope and encouragement by the national, regional, and global efforts that are being undertaken to move from the commitment to action, include the integration of the Nairobi commitments into national action plans, national sectoral policies, and the establishment of multi-stakeholders coalition and tracking mechanism, as well as the integration of the Nairobi commitments in UN accountability process, such as the Universal Periodic Reviews of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Moreover, these commitments and the Commission mission weren't just ink on paper. It was a real engagement. And as a youth-led movement in Morocco, we confirm it and would like to highlight as well since the beginning of our mission, we have had the support of the UNFPA to launch several action and concrete action initiatives in the Kingdom of Morocco. First and foremost, we cannot wait another 25 years. We need to push for accountability to make sufficient progress in addressing the current deficit by many countries to deliver on the sexual and reproductive rights commitments for women and girls, using a framework of sexual and reproductive justice to reform the issues and policy decisions that emerge from them. In order to achieve accountability, we need to make sure that to tackle this access, gender equality, global partnerships with all stakeholders, local, regional, and international strategic. Follow up the implementation of the ICPD 25 commitments made during the Nairobi Summit. Human rights-based accountability principles approaches should be used in achieving the SDGs by 2030 and beyond. Data acquisition, civil society engagement, the input of indigenous, minority, and other marginalized communities is imperative in the design of the future goals. Accountability will be enabled by the recommendations of no exception, no exclusion. The report of the high-level commission being adopted by myriad partners, including by decision and policy-making institutions, and with the many high-level personalities present with us today as guests and participants. It should to start with them as leaders and agents of change, setting the example for all of us. Thank you so much, Interest Young People.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aznag, for sharing how you as a young person were involved in this entire process. It is essential to know that we have to include all people in the achievements of these commitments. Thank you very much. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Honorable Princess Kazune Zulu, MP Deputy Chief Whip of the National Assembly of Zambia and Chair of Zambia Women's Parliamentary Caucus. Welcome, Honorable Princess Kazune Zulu. How do you see the role of parliamentarians fitting into this strong demand for implementation and accountability? What needs to be improved to ensure that governments are accountable to their Nairobi and GEF commitments?
Well, let me say that thank you so very much for having me. And I want to appreciate all the honorable listeners on this forum, and also the opportunity that I've been given as a member of parliament for Zambia and the deputy chief whip in parliament here in Zambia. Let me start by saying that this is a very important role that we as members of parliament have been invited to convene and to lend our voice, because many other times that I think, even though we play very, has actually been talked. And for me, not only am I a member of parliament, but I've also someone who has been living with HIV and AIDS since 25 years ago, when I was about 21 years. And so this is good for me to be speaking from a place of leadership, but also from a person living with HIV and AIDS who have known the realities of being a teenage mother as well as a double orphan. In terms of what I would love to deliver this morning, this afternoon here, Zambian time, it is that parliamentarians are elected by the people for the people. As such, we have a very critical role in ensuring that governments are accountable in their commitments, either by state party or also by the human rights treaties. And many other times that governments make treaties outside the country. It is important, therefore, that we as members of parliament see to it that those signed treaties are also domesticated in our given countries. It is for this reason that whether the commitments are done at a high level or they are indeed regional, as it relates to even achieving the agenda for 2030, the Nairobi Summit and the Generation on Eco Forum, we as members of parliament are very actually critical and are looking forward to all these commitments and playing a critical role. Unfortunate, like I've already alluded to, quite often the roles of members of parliament is actually overlooked, especially in the international spaces. And therefore, I would like to congratulate the conveners of this very important meeting for inviting me to share a voice for this important meeting on the perspectives of the members of parliament. Members of parliament continue to play a pivotal and critical role in advancing the international conference, advancing the agenda that was at the international conference on population and development, ICPD, since 1996, as well as the ICPD that happened in Nairobi, where I was supposed to have attended. However, we see that even though all these things have been achieved and also the Beijing conference, we continue to see that the maternal death continues, gender inequalities, sexual and gender-based violence also continues in our different countries. And Zambia is one of those countries, even though some achievements are being made. It is therefore that in bringing a voice of the members of parliament, we want to ensure that that which was achieved or the agendas that were set at the ICPD in 2019, as well as the Beijing conference, these agendas on women and girls continue to be sustained, because it is the ICPD 2025 and the Beijing plus 2025 agenda for all women and girls is what we hope to see achieved as members of parliament. As African members of parliament in particular, if I may zero into that, we have an opportunity to take decisive decision that will remove the persistent structural and systematic barriers that still prevent far so many women and girls from accessing their sexual and reproductive health and rights. We have strong policies, instruments in Africa, like the Maputo Protocol and the Maputo Plan action. However, we need more coordinated approach to track their domestication and implementation through the actions that are African-driven. So we are looking at homegrown solutions. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we know that all this cannot be achieved in an individual state, but we are a collected effort, especially in the region of Africa. However, we cannot minimize or undermine the effect that COVID has taught us, and also has actually brought on us to say that systems are all interconnected. Hence, the primary healthcare is critical. When nested within a robust health system, can help us deal with the current and future global health security issues. Financing primary health care, therefore, and ensuring the availability of SRHR at all levels is very critical for our girls and women. As I always say, that the issues of women and girls are issues for all of us. Finally, it is here, therefore, that parliamentarians acting on behalf of their constituencies can serve as a critical role in ensuring that we achieve our agendas. I thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us and for remembering us that decision makers within the government are elected by the people for the people. And also for letting us know how important is the role of decision makers within the government on the implementation of these agendas and commitments. J'ai maintenant le privilège de passer à la dernière partie de notre événement pour en apprendre davantage sur ce que l'on appelle la perspective institutionnelle de la responsabilité. Et pour ça, nous avons l'honneur d'avoir avec nous 3 grandes championnes des agendas de la CIPD et de Pékin, dont le travail a été remarquable au niveau national et international pour faire progresser l'égalité des sexes, l'autonomisation et les droits des femmes et des filles, y compris la santé et les droits sexuels et reproductifs. Aujourd'hui, on a Dr. Nadine Gassman, présidente de l'Institut national des femmes, Mexique. Madame Delphine O, ambassadrice pour la Generation Equality, France. Son Excellence, l'ambassadrice María del Carmen Esquef, représentante permanente de l'Argentine auprès des Nations Unies. Excelencias, ustedes representan a diferentes países, culturas y regiones, pero hay algo muy especial que tienen en común, su compromiso con la equidad de género. Estamos ansiosos de conocer sus experiencias, lecciones aprendidas y mejores prácticas en materia de responsabilidad. ¿Dónde están los puntos en común? ¿Qué podemos aprender unas de otras? Nos gustaría saber cómo cada una de ustedes ve la rendición de cuentas a nivel nacional. Seguir como hasta ahora no es una opción. ¿Qué hay que hacer para que los compromisos se transformen en una realidad? Doctora Gassman tiene la palabra.
Muchísimas gracias, Marianela. Realmente es un placer estar con ustedes esta mañana. Quiero saludar a todas las personas que están aquí, pero especialmente quiero darle un saludo a Natalia Karem, a Delfino y a la embajadora, porque somos aliadas en este camino. Ha sido muy importante escuchar a quienes han hablado sobre los compromisos que se han derivado de estas agendas internacionales y que nos sirven de guía para lograr sociedades más igualitarias que garanticen el derecho de todas las mujeres. Estamos muy contentas de esta invitación al Instituto Nacional de las Mujeres del Gobierno de México, porque nos va a permitir encontrar vínculos para el cumplimiento de los compromisos internacionales como aquellos derivados de la Cumbre de Nairobi y del Foro Generación e Igualdad. En la Cumbre de Nairobi, México se comprometió a avanzar en garantizar los derechos sexuales y reproductivos de las mujeres, su acceso a una vida libre de violencia y a establecer una política de población con sentido humanista que fomente el desarrollo para abatir las brechas de desigualdad. A nivel nacional, la coordinación para cumplir con estos compromisos que se derivan de la Conferencia Internacional sobre Población y Desarrollo y de su implementación regional a través del Consenso de Montevideo, se concentró en la creación del Comité Nacional para la Implementación y el Seguimiento del Consenso de Montevideo sobre Población y Desarrollo. Y estamos avanzando en el cumplimiento de nuestros compromisos. En nuestro programa Nacional de Igualdad entre Mujeres y Hombres y Proigualdad, hemos incluido en uno de sus objetivos acciones de diversos sectores para garantizar el ejercicio de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, así como mecanismos para la identificación temprana de violencia sexual contra niñas, niños y adolescentes, y la implementación de herramientas para la prevención y atención de la violencia de género, como la construcción de las redes de mujeres constructoras de paz. Seguimos fortaleciendo las políticas públicas para disminuir la mortalidad materna y eliminar muertes causadas por abortos inseguros, así como para garantizar el acceso a anticonceptivos de emergencia y a la interrupción legal del embarazo. Después de 15 años de la despenalización del aborto en la Ciudad de México, en los últimos 2 años, producto de la lucha de las mujeres y el trabajo de abogacía en diferentes niveles, incluidas a las feministas institucionales, como nos llamamos, 8 estados tenemos despenalizado el aborto en México. Y como mi colega Esperanza mencionó, el año pasado tuvimos un avance histórico con la resolución de la Suprema Corte de Justicia de la Nación, mediante la que declaró inconstitucional la criminalización del aborto en México y se pronunció por primera vez a favor de garantizar el derecho de las mujeres y personas gestantes a decidir sin enfrentar consecuencias penales. Esta decisión sentó un valioso precedente que establece bases sólidas para garantizar el derecho de las mujeres a decidir autónomamente sobre su cuerpo y su maternidad y ejercer sus derechos reproductivos y su derecho a la salud sexual y reproductiva. En el Instituto de las Mujeres hemos apostado a reducir el embarazo adolescente y eliminar la violencia sexual contra las niñas, apoyando de manera significativa y decidida la Estrategia Nacional para la Prevención del Embarazo Adolescente. Y una de las cosas que hemos hecho desde que inició el gobierno del presidente López Obrador es tener un fondo para el bienestar y avance de las mujeres que convoca a las instancias de las mujeres en los estados para que impulsen proyectos con perspectiva de género e interculturalidad para promover la educación en sexualidad integral, el fortalecimiento de los servicios y la coordinación interinstitucional. Es necesario seguir promoviendo el reconocimiento de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos en foros como estos, internacionales, que reproduzcan el diálogo intergeneracional, interseccional. Y así fue el Foro Generación Igualdad que organizamos México y Francia con ONU Mujeres y que reunió a las y los líderes mundiales para acelerar el progreso de la igualdad de género en línea con la Declaración y Plataforma de Beijing. El gobierno mexicano registró diversos compromisos en la plataforma del foro y quiero destacar la ratificación del convenio 190 de la OIT sobre la erradicación de violencia y acoso laboral que se hizo hace unos días por el Senado de la República. Y otro resultado objetivo del foro es la Alianza Global por los Cuidados que lanzamos en México como líder de la Coalición de Acción por la Justicia y los Derechos Económicos con el apoyo de ONU Mujeres. Entre otros compromisos asumidos en el marco de esta alianza está garantizar la redistribución, reducción, reconocimiento, remuneración y representación del trabajo de cuidado. La alianza coadyuva al cumplimiento de los compromisos hechos por México durante la cumbre de Nairobi de implementar políticas que conduzcan a la conciliación de la vida laboral y familiar con igualdad de oportunidades y perspectiva de género para contribuir en la distribución del trabajo doméstico, los cuidados y la crianza. Esta alianza tiene, después de un año, 55 integrantes. Es un espacio de co-creación, cooperación y colaboración para compartir las mejores prácticas, articular diálogos y generar incidencia que implemente acciones interinstitucionales sobre el cuidado a nivel local y global. Sabemos que todavía existe una gran brecha entre lo que las mujeres viven en su realidad cotidiana y lo que dicen las leyes y los instrumentos de políticas públicas. Tenemos que seguir impulsando el cambio cultural que se requiere para avanzar hacia la igualdad sustantiva entre hombres y mujeres, y hago también un llamado a los hombres que hagan su parte. Reconocer, proteger, defender y garantizar los derechos humanos y las libertades de mujeres, niñas y adolescentes en toda su diversidad significa no dejar a nadie atrás y no dejar a nadie afuera. Hagamos de ello nuestra prioridad en línea con el cumplimiento de compromisos e instrumentos internacionales que nosotras mismas hemos construido. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctora Gassman. Madame Delphine O, vous avez la parole.
I will speak in English. Dear Executive Director, dear Ministers, Ambassador, and Princess, dear Nadine, dear participants, dear all. It is my true honor and my pleasure to be participating in this panel discussion today. First of all, I would like to thank UN Women Argentina, Denmark, and Mexico, but also IPPF and UNFPA for organizing this very important moment and for all of the good work put into the preparation. I will speak about the Generation Equality Forum, following on my friend Nadine's words. Back in June of last year, our goal and hope was that the Generation Equality Forum will contribute to remobilizing the international community in favor of gender equality, and that concrete commitments will be made to achieve a multilateralism through action and to make ambitious, innovative, and concrete commitments. This moment today is a testimony that even after 9 months, champions, governments, international organizations, civil society members are very much determined to continue collectively fighting for gender equality and women's rights. Unfortunately, since the Generation Equality Forum, the world got darker with many crises that are currently raging all over the world, especially in Afghanistan and now in Ukraine. These crises reinforce gender inequalities and they hit women and girls very hard everywhere. They do remind us that our collective response must be to strengthen the rights of women and girls. We cannot achieve sustainable peace without involving half of the population. This is why Nairobi happened, this is why Beijing happened, and this is why Paris happened. We have seen some great commitments there, including a large number of member states to address the multiple intersecting forms of discrimination, coercion, and violence against women and girls everywhere in the world. It is our responsibility as governments to make sure that the commitments made for the next 5 years will continue despite of the uncertainty of the world and the national context of each and one of us. We need to make sure collectively that gender equality remain a high priority everywhere. We need constant attention so that these strong engagements will be implemented, that our efforts to change the world will truly reach the women and girls. What does this require? Well, a strong accountability mechanism with a capacity to follow up the engagements and organize regular meetings about it. This is why I do welcome the announcements that were made just yesterday, the day before yesterday, by UN Women on the follow-up and accountability of the commitments made at the Generation Equality Forum. This follow-up, as well as the accountability mechanism and governance process that will be put in place, is key to moving forward with a concrete implementation of our commitments. The government of France will continue to support the importance of this monitoring and accountability mechanism, being transparent, easily measurable, and continuing to involve all of the forum's actors, because transparency is key and we are here all allies. A continuous discussion with civil society members and partners to exchange about the progress made and what remains to be done is also at the core of what we're trying to do. It is important that we collectively have key moments, key milestones to meet in order to take stock at midterm and at the end of the 5 years of our collective action in favor of gender equality. We also need, perhaps more than ever, to keep creating spaces like the Generation Equality Forum, like the Nairobi Summit, so that we can continue to discuss collectively alert collectively, advocate collectively about the necessity to implement such commitments and the women and girls that are not left behind. Like you said, business as usual is no longer an option, and we are determined here in France, together with our allies across the world, to fight for continuous mobilization to achieve gender equality, so that the commitments made yesterday and the one that will be made tomorrow will be implemented concretely. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame O. Su Excelencia, Embajadora Skef, tiene la palabra.
No se escucha. Se acabó el sonido. Hola. Hola, ¿me escucha?
Le escuchamos.
Se escucha, pero no se ve.
¿No se ve? Qué raro.
Ya la podemos ver.
Ahora sí.
¿Ahora
Embajador.
sí? Bueno, gracias. Bueno, buenos días a todas y a todos. Muchísimas gracias, Marianela. En el marco de la 66 sesión de la Comisión de la Condición Social y Jurídica de la Mujer, me complace poder formar parte del presente evento junto con las misiones de México, Francia, Dinamarca, el resto de las agencias de Naciones Unidas aliadas en el tema, como así también de la sociedad civil. En primer lugar, quiero destacar la relevancia del instrumento como la plataforma de Beijing, adoptada en el año 1995, y el Plan de Acción de la Conferencia Internacional sobre Población y Desarrollo, adoptado en 1994. Ambos instrumentos internacionales son relevantes porque recomiendan a los Estados miembros una gran cantidad de acciones para avanzar hacia la igualdad de género y el empoderamiento de mujeres y niñas en diferentes aspectos de sus vidas. La Declaración y la Plataforma de Beijing de 1955 es una agenda con visión de futuro para el empoderamiento de las mujeres. Hoy en día continúa siendo la hoja de ruta y el marco de políticas internacional más exhaustivo para la acción, y la actual fuente de orientación e inspiración para lograr la igualdad de género y los derechos humanos de las mujeres y las niñas en todo el mundo. La plataforma de acción de Beijing, por ejemplo, abarca 12 esferas de especial preocupación que continúan siendo tan relevantes hoy en día como hace 27 años. La pobreza, la educación, la salud, la violencia contra la mujer, los conflictos armados, la economía, el ejercicio del poder, los mecanismos institucionales para el adelanto de la mujer, los derechos humanos, los medios de difusión, el medio ambiente y la niña. Para cada esfera de especial preocupación se identificaron objetivos estratégicos, además de una serie detallada de medidas relacionadas que los gobiernos y otras partes interesadas deben llevar a cabo a nivel nacional, regional e internacional. En ese sentido, estimo interesante el planteo del presente evento paralelo, ya que los Estados miembros en estos documentos se han comprometido con acciones específicas. Recordemos que estos documentos fueron adoptados en la década de los 90, por lo que esos compromisos es necesario revisarlos a la luz de los desafíos actuales, teniendo en cuenta que las sociedades cambian. Los mecanismos de rendición de cuentas son fundamentales y son los estados quienes internamente deben establecer sistemas de monitoreo y bases de datos para analizar las situaciones y las formas de diseñar políticas efectivas que tengan en cuenta los compromisos asumidos en el escenario internacional. Ahora bien, me gustaría compartir con ustedes cómo el gobierno de mi país, Argentina, interpreta los compromisos asumidos en Beijing, El Cairo y en el Foro Generación Igualdad, donde Argentina, junto con Francia y Dinamarca, formó parte de la coalición sobre derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Permítanme compartir solo algunas de las medidas nacionales que rinden cuenta del fuerte compromiso de Argentina. Quisiera agregar que la delegación de mi país estuvo representada por la ministra de las Mujeres, Géneros y Diversidad,
la señora Elizabeth Gómez Alcorta, en esta sesión de la Comisión de la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer, lo que demuestra el alto perfil que tiene la agenda de género para Argentina. En ese sentido, permítanme destacar también la creación en Argentina del Ministerio de Mujeres, Géneros y Diversidad en diciembre de 2019, lo cual constituye un hito trascendental en la historia institucional de nuestro país. Durante los años 2020 y 2021, la Argentina fue uno de los países que más medidas con perspectiva de género adoptó en el contexto de la pandemia, dirigidas a mitigar los efectos sanitarios y socioeconómicos de las crisis sobre las mujeres y las niñas, y relacionadas con la protección del trabajo formal y los salarios, el reconocimiento de las tareas de cuidados no remuneradas y la erradicación de las violencias por motivos de género. En materia económica se destaca la aprobación del primer presupuesto nacional con perspectiva de género y diversidad de la Argentina, por parte del reconocimiento de las desigualdades estructurales de género existentes, y se presenta como una herramienta clave para pensar la recuperación económica post-pandemia con una mirada de género que promueva la erradicación de dichas brechas. ¿Por qué los presupuestos con perspectiva de género son una herramienta crucial para la rendición de cuentas a nivel nacional? Desde la gestión se necesita negociar partidas presupuestarias para llevar adelante políticas con perspectiva de género. Poder ver claramente dónde están los esfuerzos que hace el Estado para achicar la desigualdad, monitorear su nivel de cumplimiento y entender qué falta. Por eso es importante esa perspectiva de género en los presupuestos nacionales. En nuestro país, las mujeres realizan el 76% del trabajo doméstico y de cuidados no remunerado. Esta distribución asimétrica de tareas que se realizan en los hogares y recae sobre las mujeres impacta sobre sus posibilidades en el mercado laboral. Tienen tasas de desempleo realmente importantes y también tenemos empleos precarios, menores ingresos, mayor tasa de desempleo, menores jubilaciones y finalmente mayor representación en la pobreza que los varones. La pandemia acentuó estas desigualdades. Cerrar brechas de desigualdad implica establecer políticas públicas con perspectiva de género y asignar recursos a estas políticas. Para ello es clave este diagnóstico en el proceso presupuestario, así como innovar en formas de medición y registro, construcción de indicadores, capacitación, entre otras cuestiones. Este es el proceso que cobró protagonismo en 2020 y que resultó en el presupuesto de 2021. Un presupuesto con perspectiva de género en el que se puede observar que se destina un 15,2% del gasto a políticas que contribuyen a reducir las brechas de género. Puesto de esta manera, el presupuesto es además de una herramienta de planificación estatal, es también una herramienta de transformación, dado que busca integrar los lineamientos para una gestión feminista de manera transversal a todas las áreas de gobierno. En 2021, además de trabajar en el nuevo ciclo presupuestario y en pos de fortalecer esta herramienta, se puso en marcha la capacitación Herramientas para la construcción de un presupuesto con perspectiva de género y diversidad, dictada en el marco del Instituto Nacional de Administración Pública para representantes de todos los ministerios. Actualmente se encuentran participando de la capacitación 86 representantes de todos los organismos del sector público nacional. Por otra parte, y en lo que hace a la ampliación de derechos en materia de autonomía corporal, quiero destacar que la sanción de la Ley de Interrupción Voluntaria del Embarazo en diciembre de 2020, el Estado argentino asumió así la responsabilidad de legislar y proteger con políticas públicas la salud y la vida de las mujeres y de personas con otras identidades de género con capacidad de gestar. Quiero aclarar que esta es una ley nacional, o sea que cubre todo el territorio de Argentina. A la par de esta ley, hemos sancionado una ley de atención y cuidado integral de la salud durante el embarazo y la primera infancia, que amplía beneficios y derechos y garantiza la atención de la salud de las mujeres en la etapa del embarazo y a los niños y niñas en los primeros años de vida. Estamos hablando de construcción de derechos, de una moneda con dos caras y la posibilidad de la elección de la interrupción voluntaria del embarazo, pero también la posibilidad de continuar con el embarazo con el respaldo necesario para hacerlo. Asimismo, Argentina ocupa espacios claves y es vocal en la defensa de los derechos de las mujeres, niñas y diversidades de Naciones Unidas. Estamos actualmente en la vicepresidencia, en representación del GRULAC, Grupo Latinoamericano y del Caribe, en la Junta Ejecutiva de ONU Mujeres, en la mesa de trabajo de la condición de esta comisión sobre la condición jurídica y social de la mujer, en la copresidencia del grupo LGBTI de Naciones Unidas, que compartimos con orgullo con Países Bajos. Quiero decir también que hemos ratificado el convenio 190 de la OIT y también que tenemos una línea específica para situaciones de maltrato o violencia, que es la 144. Por último, y con estas palabras, quiero terminar mi intervención recordando la importancia de los compromisos internacionales que asumen los estados, porque son estos estándares internacionales los que luego, a nivel nacional, permiten lograr avances concretos para que la igualdad de género sea una realidad. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Su Excelencia. Escuchar a las y los tomadores de decisiones es esperanzador e inspirador. Tenemos una mejor idea de lo que se tiene que hacer y qué es lo que funciona. Sin embargo, necesitamos voluntad política e invertir para cumplir estas metas. Quiero compartir con ustedes algunas reflexiones antes del cierre del evento. We demonstrated how using normative processes, such as CSW agreed conclusions and human rights norms for advocacy and implementation, does work. Youth participation and leaving no one behind is critical and essential. Investment and financing is key to the implementation and accountability. This investment is essential for our future. We need to act now to ensure gender equality and sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. I want to thank the organizers, panelists, and audience for sharing their time, wisdom, and dedication with us. The implementation of these agendas is a collective effort where every single decision maker and voice is important in order to leave no one behind. Gender equality is a much needed investment in every single country. It ensures the well-being of all people. We need to work together actively in order to implement all the commitments. Thank you again for your time and for tuning in. Be well.
A la una, me voy a